Everybody, and welcome to ShiresTV. It's always really fun when we get to broadcast from the factory and talk about some of the things that it is that we do. We love getting to feature and focus the projects and the work that our artists do and our colleagues. Tonight is no different. This is a really exciting time for us to be able to kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse into a day in the life of really like some of the fun stuff at Shires, the actual instruments and the equipment and what it takes to get someone on a setup that feels really good for them. Typically, when times are normal, we have a really wonderful Willy Wonka showroom that we're able to allow visitors and customers and fans and friends and colleagues to be able to come, test equipment, see what it does for them, get a tour of the factory, all of that. Right now, we're not able to open the showroom, the factory up to our friends and family at the moment. We're hopeful that that will change. But an idea that we had that I'm really happy with and I'm really excited for is this concept of a virtual fitting. This doesn't mean that we totally believe that there's like you do a Zoom thing with us and like we're going to tell you what you should play. It's really just another tool to be able to give you some more information about equipment that you're interested in. You've always wondered what the difference was between that Ralph Sauer bell and that Colin Williams bell, or can you like tell me how does a seam tuning slide typically affect the way that it might feel for me? So I think it's going to be a really nice way to be able to connect with one of our specialists anyway, get that one-on-one, face-to-face kind of interaction. And to be honest, even when it's not a global pandemic, not everyone can always get to the factory. Maybe you don't live somewhat in the area, or you live overseas, or it's not going to work for your school semester. So this is a nice way to be able to have just a little bit more contact with us. We are always answering the same kinds of questions, whether it's email or phone. So this is just another avenue. Plus, you've got an incredible resource in Alexis, who can be in the showroom and actually like, okay, well, let's take a look at these two bells. Like, can you see the difference in the fact that this is soldered and this one's unsoldered, or the taper of, something else? Or I think it's going to be a really nice tool to be able to add to your toolbox when you're thinking about equipment changes. So for tonight, this seems like a really nice opportunity. We just opened up virtual fittings on our website. So you can go to www.seshires.com/schedule, which is the same place that you would go, and I'm just going to link it here for you guys. It's the same place that you would go to be able to book a normal appointment. When normal appointments come back on, we'll have two options. You can choose a virtual appointment, or you can choose the actual physical in-person appointment. For now, it's just the virtual appointment, but it's really easy. You'll still be able to select a time slot, and we'll just do it on Zoom. Your confirmation email will actually include the Zoom link. So I know we've already got some scheduled for next week, which is going to be really fun. But moving forward, we're always here to answer questions and get geeky. And I think that this just gives us a little bit more ability to connect with you and make sure that we're answering your questions. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis because she's going to lead us through this magical world of Shires instruments. And the only other thing that I'll say is virtual fittings are not only going to be for trombone. It's also going to be for trumpet, for euphonium, mouthpiece questions, maybe even like some repair stuff, and we can hook you up with our repair team or whatever. But it's just a really great resource. So we may cover a lot of trombone specific stuff because we have a really fantastic musician who is our guinea pig for tonight, Alex Nutrid, who's going to be also taking himself off mute in a little while, I'm sure. But so we'll talk a lot about trombone, but if you do have questions about equipment tonight, trumpet, euphonium, trombone, the fitting process or anything, pop it in the comments below. I'm going to monitor those and we'll work those in. But without further ado, Alexis, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is a really exciting service that we are stoked to be able to offer and to have the opportunity to kind of test it out tonight. One of the things I'd really love to do is, while we're doing this, kind of demystify the whole fitting process, because there is a lot to it, and we do, as Sam mentioned, get asked a lot of the same questions. So if we could address this on a forum, you can ask questions, maybe we can sort of figure out what's actually going on behind the sound voodoo, which someone once said, and I appreciate greatly. I also want to thank Alex Knutrid for joining us. He is a Boston-based freelancer, got his master's from BU with Toby Oft. He also wrote 30 routines for the modern trombonist, a fantastic book about trills, long tones, slurs, articulations, pretty much all the tools that a successful trombonist needs in their toolbox. And he also founded Tromboneguide.com, which is a really great resource for amateur musicians, pro musicians, beginning musicians. It's a fantastic way to sort of keep the pedagogy going while we're still figuring out what's going on for the incoming school year, but also just to stay motivated because sometimes it's hard. So thank you, Alex, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So obviously, as Sam also mentioned, we aren't expecting this to totally take the place of an in-person fitting. There's a lot of nuance in a sound, as we all know. There's a lot about a color palette. There's a lot about kind of even a sparkle and a shimmer. And then there's a lot also that comes with feeling. One of the reasons why we have so many different pieces of equipment is because everyone reacts slightly differently. And that's okay. That's what makes it all so much fun. That's what kind of makes it like instrument therapy in a way. And it keeps everything exciting. So for the virtual fittings, one of the things we've been thinking about is sort of running it a little bit differently, obviously. Like, obviously, you can't try out the equipment here at the factory. But if there's also a way we can figure out how to start you on the journey of finding the correct horn for you, and then you go to a dealer, or it's something that you can keep in mind and think about in your own trombone playing, then that's a fantastic thing to do. If you're living out in California or maybe even in Japan, and it's tough to come across the country to Boston for a couple days, then this is also a fantastic resource as well. And I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to be able to test it out and see what happens. So, how we start all appointments. I like to hear about what are you playing, Alex? Like, what is your horn that you're currently playing?
Sure. So this is the instrument that I play when I play most of what I do. So that's a number of orchestras that I substitute in, and then some teaching and freelance gigs around here and there. This is a Bach 42 from 1964. It has a Greenhoe valve on it. I believe the valve section is from 2006 or 2007. The bell itself is marked Bach 42 Mount Vernon. It is a traditional yellow brass bell, but the alloy is a little bit closer to red than most yellow brass bells that you'll find today. We're not really sure what it is because it's unmarked in that sense. The rim itself is unsoldered, and it has a French rim bead around the edge. So
I'm going to interrupt for 2 seconds. Not everyone is going to know all of this great information about their horn, just as a heads up. And that's really cool. Alex is brilliant in a lot of different ways, and he's also an equipment geek like we are. So I'm just prefacing by saying that he's like already dialed into like some equipment stuff. So if you don't know all of the stuff that he's talking about for your own setup, totally cool.
definitely, yeah. This was something that I had to learn piece by piece. You know, I played a Shires trombone for 10 years and absolutely loved it. And then I played a con and I liked that too. And this Bach, it's just a matter of, you know, slowly figuring out what works best for you at that given time. You know, this horn is awesome. It's probably not my forever horn. You know, it's important to be flexible and understand that as you grow as a musician, your equipment needs are going to change too. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, exploring new equipment does help unlock new growth in us as players. So I think it's really important to mention that right off the bat. You know, this is an instrument that I love, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything beyond the fact that it works for me today, day to day, right now. Back to where I was, the slide here is just a standard Bach 42 slide with yellow brass all around. The crook is yellow brass as well.
Yeah. So let's start with the bell. Let's break down the bell. One of the things I like to do when someone comes in, build a horn out of Shires parts that is similar to the instrument that they're currently on. One of the reasons for this is because you might be flying in, maybe that day, maybe the night before. You're playing in a room that has beautiful resonance, but it's probably different than what your current practice room is. And then also you're on a completely different horn. You're on a Shires horn, which plays differently than other horns. And that's just how it is. So we want to keep as many variables similar as possible. So the transition might be a little less jarring because there's going to be a lot going on. You're going to see all the different bells, all the different slides, and it's exciting. It might be overwhelming, but it's part of the process. So I like to build a horn similar to what whomever is doing the appointment. So what Alex is on. So he talks about a Mount Vernon bell. Now, Mount Vernon bell is a beautiful bell. It's a work of art. It's historical. It's gorgeous. A Mount Vernon bell is a one-piece bell, and he mentioned it has French bead wire. We offer many different types of bell constructions and bead wire, and they all make a difference. It's crazy. Everything makes a difference. So let's break down bell construction really quickly. A one-piece bell means that the bell is going to be very flexible. It's going to have a really gorgeous color palette. It's going to feel very open. On the other spectrum, you have a traditional two-piece bell. So basically what that means is, my bell is a two-piece bell. We'll look at a different bell. So a two-piece bell, this is actually our Leslie bell. It is a two-piece bell, and if you see really closely, it's hard over here, but you'll just have to take my word for it. It means that the bell stem and the bell flare are braced together, so it's really two pieces. But what that additional weight does as well is it gives you a little bit more stability and a little bit more density to the sound. Articulations might be a little bit easier. Then we also offer a modified two-piece bell, which is sort of the best of the one-piece bell and the two-piece bell. If you play a 7-YLW, which is very popular, that's a modified two-piece bell. I personally play a 7-YLW. I like it a lot. It's fun. So then let's go to the bead wire. Alex mentioned that he has a French bead wire, which generally is a little bit more pointed. And Alex, you mentioned that it is unsoldered, correct?
Yeah, it's an unsoldered bead wire, and the actual bell rim is French rimmed, so it's been angled out. I think that's how that is, right?
Yeah, so like a normal bead wire is a gauge of brass, typically, or a different material, steel sometimes. When it's a French bead, it's milled in half, so it's semi-round. So when it gets put into the bell, it's almost, it changes the direction of the sound. It's a different process, and it really also, and Alexis will talk about this, affects the sound that comes out of the horn too. But yeah, it's milled in half.
You know, it's a really special thing to have a French rim. They're not very common anymore. In fact, I know that Shires does them, but I don't know if anybody else still does them. They were very popular in the 40s and the early 50s, and I haven't seen many of them. So it's pretty cool that you guys are still doing it.
We just had another artist, Christian Brenhofer in Spain, who actually just purchased one of our vintage New York bells with a French bead. And it's a very, like you're saying, it's a really special, colorful sound. It's really gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, there's really nice projection to it, I've noticed, with the French bead. Yeah. But we also have soldered and unsoldered bead wires. So a soldered bead wire, it basically means that we have soldering between the lip of the bead wire and kind of the bell. You can feel it, you can stick your fingernail in it. But if it's soldered, I've noticed, and these are just my observations, that the articulation is generally has a little bit more clarity to the front of it. It's a little bit more efficient. You can project a little bit further towards the back of the hall. And unsoldered bead wire, it has kind of this beautiful round quality to it. The articulations are a little bit warmer. They're not potentially as sharp. I hate to use that word, but that's sort of what I think about. And so that's pretty much breaking down the bell and some of the things that you mentioned, Alex. So what I did is I found our vintage New York bell, which was, we actually drew on the Mount Vernon bells as inspiration because they are such incredible bells. So our vintage New York bell, it is a one-piece bell with soldered bead wire. What I found here that was super cool is I found one with a French bead. So yeah, so if you were here, that's something that I would want you to play on because it most similarly resembles your current bell. I wouldn't want to put you on a traditional two-piece with soldered bead wiring or, you know, red brass. Even if you're like, I want to play red brass bell. We're going to do it in steps, so it's not as jarring, so we can start to see the increments and how different things affect and kind of take out different variables and isolate what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Because again, everybody reacts slightly differently. Then, moving on to the slide, I put together our TW47 yellow crook. So your box slide is a single bore slide with a yellow crook, which means that it's going to be efficient, but it's also, the yellow crook is going to give it a little bit of warmth, a little bit more color to it. And so I put that slide on the horn. Then one of the things I did, I actually put on our Alessi valve. And the Alessi valve, it's a rotor, but it has a couple things that make it really, really special that I absolutely love. So for instance, we have a bronze valve cap, which generally a traditional rotor is incredibly efficient. It's going to be very stable, and it's also going to not necessarily be as woofy as maybe an axial could be. The drawback is sometimes that the color palette isn't as interesting, for lack of a better word, sometimes a little bit more shallow.
And just really quick, we are having a little bit of difficulty hearing both of you when you're speaking.
Okay. Scoot closer.
Just stay close and just keep it really nice and yeah.
I'll also talk a little louder. So anyway, so our bronze cap, even though it doesn't seem like it should do a lot, it actually does. You get a lot more warmth to the sound of the rotor while still keeping that efficiency. And another thing that we did slightly different is the bracing of the rotor. We took out some of the additional braces that our traditional rotor has. And in lieu of that, we actually have this fun, I can even show you, a fun double diagonal brace you can kind of see over here. Do I have a rotor here? Yeah. We have a double diagonal brace. It's exciting.
So would you say that that valve is a bit more open than a traditional rotor, or does it feel similar despite the cap?
I would say that it feels a little bit more open. It's still incredibly efficient, but I feel like I have a little bit more flexibility, especially in the color palette. Like I have a little bit more depth. It's a little less kind of compressed in the sound, but it doesn't have, like I don't sometimes feel like I'm swimming. Like sometimes with an axial I might. I really love the color that comes with the Alessi rotor. And so that's something that I'd want to put you on, most similar to the Greenhoe rotor that you're currently on. And then I just put a traditional drawn yellow tuning slide, similar to the one that you are on. So this would be something that I would be interested in starting you on, but first I would ask you to play. And I would ask you to play something that demonstrates your articulation, your legato and your sound, just your sound concept. And then also your range, so something like an arpeggio, but really just something that you feel like you could play over and over and over again, because you will. It's a control that we want to have, so we can go between all the different horns and you could say, this feels easier, this feels harder, I like this sound, I do not like this sound as much. And it's one of the questions I always get is, what if I'm really nervous? Like I feel like my playing might not be as good as someone else's. And honestly, we don't care. Like we really don't care. We're here to find you the best horn for you. It's not necessarily a reflection of your playing at all. We just want to hear you play, and we want to build you the horn that's going to bring you the most success, that you feel the most comfortable on. So Alex, would you play something articulated for me? Actually, because you're just playing, would you just do like long tone? I'm so sorry. Would you just do long tone? That's great. And then would you do something that demonstrates your articulation? And actually, I'm sorry, would you also play something in the trigger register? It could be saison, it could just be, you know, an F arpeggio, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then would you do something that goes up to at least high B flat? Like, so disclaimer, I know Alex is playing very well. Um, so I know he has a pretty awesome high range, but
So you're putting it through the ringer.
all right, okay. No, that was great. That was great.
You see, if you hadn't said he has an awesome high range, I might have sounded better.
Uh, uh, next live stream, I won't say anything. Anyway, so from all of that, and I know, again, I know that this is over computer. I know that we all have different microphones. We all, I'm sure internet connection has it. I'm terrible with computers, but I'm sure internet is a thing. Um, they're both nodding. Uh, and so a lot of the nuance might get lost. It's harder to tell, obviously, than when someone is playing right in front of me, but at least from here we can deduce a couple things. And one of the things I want to ask Alex before I say anything, because I want to hear most of all, since this is going to be your instrument, I want to hear how you feel, like what is important with how your interaction is with your instrument, and then what you're looking for. Because ultimately, you probably know yourself better than I do. So Alex, in your playing, what do you think is a strength, and what do you wish you had a little bit more help on, a little bit more support?
Sure. Well, I generally, that might be a little more clear. So I generally would say that I don't have a problem getting a warm sound out of most instruments, particularly even if I were to get an instrument that was particularly bright, I can still generally achieve a darker sound. Something that I generally do struggle a little bit with, and I find that I have to police myself in practice constantly, would be clarity of articulation in the low register. Being able to achieve really comfortable pedal playing is something that I have to work at every day, and it does not come naturally. I find that being able to articulate very staccato and even marcato Stravinsky style music is something that doesn't come naturally to me either. I spend a lot of time in my own personal pedagogy trying to remove tension, and as a result I end up with a very, you know, supported legato style of playing as my natural standard, and therefore when I have to achieve a more articulated sound, it's a bit of a struggle for me.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like, especially when you go down to the low range, do you feel like you're pushing excessively, that you have to kind of have that more tension?
Sometimes, yeah. I think that I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place sometimes in my mind as to whether I should achieve low range with an extra burst of air and just keeping, you know, tons of air going, or if I can achieve it by simply relaxing and keeping the air steady. And in the moment, often I get stuck between that decision, and I freeze trying to go between, and it causes a delay which makes things not work. I'm sure I'm not the only person watching that has had this experience, but it's definitely something that I've tried to facilitate growth on for myself, and it would inform an equipment decision for sure.
Absolutely. We all, I've noticed every single person that I've talked to, we all have something that we can do pretty easily. And then there's something that's really hard for us. Like for me, high range is difficult. So one of the things when I was actually Wes Hopper was putting together my horn is we worked on something that would make high range a little bit easier for me. And so Alex, the thing that I would want to do in finding you the right horn is keep that beautiful golden round sound concept that you have and keep that warmth. Um, but then also find something that maybe makes articulations a little bit easier, that makes a low range a little bit easier. And so we would gradually piece out equipment to try and find what works best for you. One of the interesting things I've noticed with players is the sound concept that they have in their head generally trumps equipment. That will win over. But the cool thing is that if you have a horn that you don't really have to think about the mechanics of it, you can do so much. I was talking to one of our Shires artists, Darren Workman, today, about his horn, and he's just like, it's so easy, and I can do so much more because I have that mental space cleared up to sing through my horn. And that's ultimately what we want. We want the horn to kind of be like another limb for you. You don't want to be fighting your horn. That takes up a lot of extra energy, and there's no reason to make trombone harder than it already is, which I'm sure string players are like, it's not hard, but whatever, they play strings. So how I like to piece everything out from there is I like to start with the valve. And I think especially for what you're saying with articulation and low range, valves would be really interesting. I think of the valve sort of as the heart of the instrument that you build everything around. And I'm sure other people have different opinions, and that's totally fine. But this is what I found has worked for me. I would want to keep you on something like a rotor. I don't think an axial is necessarily the way to go. And I say that because the axial, it's going to kind of give you that sort of toilet bowl feeling in the bottom for your, can I say that? Is that okay? Toilet bowl.
I mean, just say what you would say normally. Everybody in Facebook land is going to love it or hate it.
I understood your analogy perfectly.
Yeah. Everything that we do when we talk about equipment is always analogies. So, like, it's kind of like, I mean, it could be comparing things to like wine or beer. Apparently, toilet bowls. What was your other thing that you had that was so, like, you described one thing as like a velvet carpeted room?
Plush velvet carpet, or yeah, with a lot of pill to it, but it's like a royal purple that you would find in like an extremely wealthy old relative's house.
Right, and then there's
that horn, please. May I have that horn?
Yes,
That's the one
the Alex.
Yes, the velvet one. Yes.
And then you also said something about like tacos or like something like, I don't know. It gets all sorts of crazy. Yeah, I don't know.
It's like, this is more like a scotch and that's more like PBR.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like trombonists get that. So anyways, I want to keep you on something that you can feel a little bit of compression with, so you have support when you're going into the low range. One of the other interesting things I've found that you might not expect, the valve, even when it is not activated, even when you're just playing straight through the horn, the valve does make a difference. It makes a huge difference, especially in terms of articulation and even on the color palette as well. You already have this really warm, golden, round sound, so you don't need something like an axial to sort of even give you more like oomph, that's the word, to it. I think the rotor is going to help keep the support in the low register for you, and it's also going to help with your articulations and keeping them efficient and keeping them easy and crisp. We have obviously a lot of different types of rotors. We have the traditional rotor, we have our dual bore rotor, we have a true bore, we have twin valve, we have the Alessi rotor. And these are things that they're not as polarizing as axial versus rotor. They're things that you would have to try so you could feel it. So you could hear the difference between the color of, say, a dual bore versus an Alessi. One of the things that I think is really cool is if you have any dealers around you, you can take this information that we're talking about now and you can see if they have that inventory that you could try out. Obviously with COVID, it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult, or at least difficult to kind of cajole your friends into giving you their horns for a little while. Maybe if you buy them beer as disinfectant, it'll be fine.
And if they're going on vacation and they're not going to be playing for a week.
Yeah, just be safe about it. I do understand that it's probably significantly more difficult now.
Yeah.
But if you can have this information and you at least know where to start, then that is a great place. That is a fantastic place. Alex, do you have experience playing on different types of valves?
Yeah, I do actually. So, my first horn that I played for maybe 5 years was a Shire's. This was a single rotor valve, and then I went to a Shire's axial flow valve, and then I went to a Greenhoe, and I have a Greenhoe valve, but I also have another horn here that has a Rotax valve on it. So there's a little bit of variety.
And what were your experiences? I should have asked you this before, but what were your experiences going between something like a rotor and an axial? What did you notice?
So I really liked a lot of aspects of the axial flow valve. I thought it was really smooth for making slurs around the horn in any range. I felt like it allowed me to really control the louder dynamics of my horn well, because I was really allowed to open up the floodgates with plenty of air between any range, pretty much. The one, and you know what, honestly, I liked the throw. The throw in an axial flow is a little bit longer, and it gives you a nice kinesthetic response in your left hand when you're playing. If you're the kind of player that finds that you move around a little bit, or you actually just like the feedback when you're activating a valve, it's actually an underappreciated and overlooked benefit to playing an axial flow valve. I think that my biggest drawback with the axial flow was the pressure. It didn't seal as tight to me, and maybe that's not scientifically correct, but it felt like it didn't seal as evenly as the rotor valves that I've played.
Okay. What about in terms of how it felt? I mean,
I'm, I'm sorry, what?
what about how it felt in terms of playing? Not necessarily like the aspect of it, but just playing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it feels very open. I felt like I had a lot of resonance room when I was playing. You know, the best way to describe it would be like if you're looking at a bookshelf and you're putting all your CDs away. It was a CD bookshelf that just had open shelves. There were no individual slots to stick them in.
That's so interesting.
I'm going to use this on something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice that your articulations were different with the axial? Did you notice that they were harder, that they were easier? Was it better than, worse than the rotor? Whatever you think. Like think of it as like an eye doctor appointment. Is it better? Is it worse?
It was different, and I would say all in all, it was better. In the sense that I was able to, the feeling and the feedback I was getting was better, in that I didn't feel ever that I was backed up with the airflow. In terms of the actual product that I was hearing, when I would listen back to recordings, it was not more clean. And this is what was so interesting about the experience for me. Tonguing felt easy, but the product was not good.
Okay.
So it wasn't a great match for me.
So then that's something that we would want to explore in kind of narrowing down valves. We'd want something that does give you that feeling of openness, but it does also create clarity with the articulation. And we do have enough of a range that that is possible, but that is something that is absolutely worth trying out. That's absolutely worth trying out. Does that make sense?
It does. Do you find that the valves that you fit people to run in any kind of gamut from one end of the spectrum to the other, or are they all entirely individual based on like? Would I have a way to look at this and make an estimate based on how I feel I play, and then go left and right of that to try?
Absolutely. I think of valves as a range. I think on one end we have the axial, which is going to be the most open. It's going to give you, I like the axial because I feel like sometimes it has that cushion. It's a little bit smoother. And it's going to kind of give you I've noticed, a bigger, heftier sound in the low range. Then on the other end, you have something like the dual bore valve, which is very compact, very, very efficient, slots really nicely. And it's going to make articulations generally really much easier than the axial. Again, everybody reacts differently. Everybody reacts differently, and everybody has their own preferences. This is just what I've noticed. Then you have something like the true bore, which is a little bit more towards the axial. It's a little bit larger of a valve, and also it feels a little bit smoother because you have this sort of drawbridge contraption to it, and it's going to emulate the axial a little bit more than, say, a traditional rotor. The Alessi rotor I really love because it has the resonance, just because you have a little bit less bracing and you do have that bronze valve cap. So I feel like it feels similar to a traditional rotor, but you just have a darker, richer sound. It's just a richer sound, and it feels a little bit more open as a player. Then, of course, you have the traditional rotor valve, which is more akin to a dual bore valve. So there's definitely a full spectrum.
You would say that the dual bore valve to you feels more compact than.
Yeah, at least.
And one thing that I'll say too, and for some people who are familiar with Shires products, they might know this already, but we did modify our traditional rotor design 4 years ago, 5 years ago with Colin Williams, actually. When we were building out the Colin Williams model, we started doing an extra special step called chamfering the ports, which kind of like rounds out, bevels the edge of the ports, and just makes it so that basically there's like less abrupt edges. So even our standard rotor, if you haven't tried one recently, it is a little bit more open than it even used to be 10 years ago or whatever. So just as an added sidebar.
Yeah. So there's a full spectrum. There's a full spectrum. For you, I'd want something that's a little bit more open, that feels a little bit more open, something like the Alessi valve, maybe even something like a true bore that still gives you the efficiency of a rotor, but it gives you a little bit more room. So you have that feeling that you really liked, but the sound might be a better product than the axial. So that's something that I would like to experiment with. From there, I'll go to slide. So Alex, you're currently playing on a 547 single bore with a yellow crook.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. And have you ever played with a nickel crook? Or have you ever tried a dual bore slide?
My previous slide on my Shires was actually a dual bore nickel slide with a bass crook.
The whole thing.
Yeah, I think I'm to date the only person that had the combination of horn that I had, and it was wild.
And Alexis also has like a super funky, interesting setup too. So you guys are you're like unicorns of Shires land.
So I had that with a 2RVE.
Nice, man. Very interesting.
Um, what did you notice with? It's hard because there's so many different variables. You have the full nickel slide and the dual bore. Why did you move from it?
Well, this sounds so idiotic. I discovered that I had a nickel allergy. So my hands were constantly rashing up and hurting from practicing, so that wasn't great. But also, the general difficulty to achieve clarity was hard because the slide felt so big all the time.
Yeah.
I wanted something that would get a vibrant sound, and I just felt like I could never get that. I felt like I was working very hard for clarity, and in doing so I could achieve clarity with a lot of work, but I never had a sound that resonated. It just kind of was present.
Right.
It's such a different setup too than what you're on right now for a slide. It's
entirely different.
Really interesting. So like I can't wait to hear what Alexis has to say about like the pivot. Yeah.
I'd like to try you on. And they're all like fairly standard. Like obviously for something that's over the computer, I'm not going to be like, you should try this very specialized, specific, custom thing. Obviously, like that's why you come to the factory when we eventually open up. But we have our TW47, which is one of our most popular slides. It is yellow legs with a nickel crook, and it's a slightly wider crook than a standard crook, and it is a single bore 547 slide. We also have a TB47, which is pretty much the same thing as the TW47, but the crook is actually a bass crook. It's a little bit more open. The bore size is slightly different. It's more similar to a bass. And then we also have a TW47, but with a yellow crook. And so I would start you on that slide with the yellow crook, and just for fun, for my curiosity, just to see how you would react, I would try you on those 3 slides to see if maybe the nickel could help with the efficiency of articulation, to help focus the sound, but it's also possible that maybe the yellow is just the best in terms of resonance, and we want to see focus coming from maybe the bell. Because that's the thing about all of these horns is if you change one thing, then it's going to affect something else. So it's kind of like this sound puzzle, this sound Sudoku, and everything, again, makes a huge difference. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, can I ask a question on that? So I understand that, and I've been told that the lead pipe and the mouthpiece make some of the largest differences in terms of the feedback that the player can feel. Could you talk a little bit about how changing a slide changes your playing, both audibly generally, but also how the player's response to a different slide is affected? Because that's honestly something I'm very curious about, just for my benefit as well.
So if you, just to make sure that I get this right, so if you change the slide, then changing the lead pipe and the mouthpiece? If you would have
I'm
to
curious more about what changing the slide does to the way the horn plays.
Yeah, so why do you go from valve to slide next?
You know, I'm not entirely sure why I go from valve to slide, but
Is it just
slide.
because that's what I told you to do?
No, but the thing about the slide is I feel like the slide also really helps like find the articulation that you want. Eventually you get to lead pipes and that's sort of like the icing on the cake, even though it is incredibly important. But I feel like the slide, like I feel like the bell is the soul of the instrument and you get a lot of the nuance, the color, a lot of the character of the horn from the bell. And so I want that to be something that is so special and you don't particularly have to worry about um, something like mechanics. Obviously bells, they do influence mechanics, but I really want to get that shimmering quality to your sound from the bell.
So
The
like,
slide.
I was just gonna say, like, to me, like, and I've been doing like the trombone fittings and stuff since I've been with Shires for like 6, 7 years now or whatever. But like to me, and I can equate this to what our friend Wes Lebo, who's watching, who's like obviously an amazing trombone player and also an incredible like craftsman and home like builder, and like he's just amazing. If you're gonna describe it like it's a house, like to me, the valve is kind of like the foundation. I mean, that's where you're gonna get so much of the feel, the size of the sound, the feedback, some color too, but really like that initial response kind of stuff. It's suited to your body and the way that you play. To me, the slide is kind of like the walls. It's the structure. It's still that air support. It's still the feel and the size and the shape of the sound. Again, we'll mess with lead pipes a little bit later, but it's still a lot of structure. I would say, like, to me, the bell, which we typically do next, is almost like the roof of the house. You're getting like the dimensions. You're getting a lot of like shape and color, and there's just like a lot that's going into like all those nitty gritty little things. Tuning slide again helps with response, right? Maybe that's like I don't know. I'm losing my analogy, but at least like the lead pipe and some of that other stuff counterweights all that. That's really where you're starting to like add your personality and fine tune things. So like that's when you're putting in those fixtures. That's when you're spending the time to really like make those right decisions. Like, so for me, slide is still a pretty structurally sound thing that you're pairing with the valve to make sure that the initial feel, blow, response is all like well suited to you.
It's so interesting to hear that because, you know, like, and I'm sure many of the people watching this have had this experience where you'll play a trombone and maybe you're at a shop and there's, or maybe you're just with friends and you switch the slide out for some reason. You know, maybe you try someone else's slide. There are not that many variations of slides that are super popular like there are bells and, you know, but what happens is two slides feel totally different. And I found at least, you know, that the slide is something that I've been experimenting recently in the last year with on my horn, and I find that I get different slides that are, you know, virtually identical, but they play so differently and they affect so much of my playing in very different places. You know, it's not like with the valve where I can say, you know, playing into the valve and the resonance and this is all very different valve to valve. It's like slides kind of seem to change different things about different players playing on an individual basis, and that's why I was super curious. And that's not even getting into the actual response of how the slide works, which, I mean, I do think Shires makes the best slides on the market because they are like glass, and I don't know how you guys get them so smooth, but in terms of the actual, yeah, it must be magic, yeah, but the actual response is
Yeah.
Nuts. Unicorn tears, right?
Unicorn tears.
Unicorn tears.
Bottled unicorn tears.
Yeah. um, I really like that with the slide being the walls, the valve, the foundation. That makes
That was all on the fly too. Started losing it a little bit, but
Have you been watching HGTV too much?
probably I've been probably doing too many COVID house projects.
Yeah. So those are the things I would be curious about the slide, and depending on how you react to each one. And the cool thing about it is those are all pretty standard. You're not going on anything weird. Probably someone you know or a dealer has one that you could try out. And the cool thing about this too is you could always email me or call me and just be like, hey, I tried the TW47. This is what I noticed. This is what I liked. This is what I didn't like. And even if you wanted to send a video or a sound clip, this is an ongoing process, especially because now it is over this.
Yeah.
It is over the internet. So one of the cool things is that with this technology, even though you're not here in person, you can still call us whenever you need, whenever you have questions, send us an email. And so something like a TW47 versus a TB47, I would be super curious to hear what you thought, what you noticed. And from there, we could even narrow it down. Maybe the wide crook is great. Maybe the bass crook is better. Maybe you just really want to keep the sound of the yellow crook and have that roundness to it, because the nickel will create more efficiency and more point, but the yellow crook will keep that warmth and that round articulation that you get. So it's definitely an ongoing conversation to have. This is not like you have the one virtual appointment or even one in-person fitting. This is an ongoing thing because you're constantly reacting. After a month, you might feel slightly differently. Who knows? This is something that we want to be here for you with.
The other thing that I just like to say really quick is that in terms of equipment, there are, of course, like, and you can kind of see a little bit from behind Alexis, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of options, all these different things. Our job is to worry about that. Your job is to let us help you through that process. With having that many options, it would seem like there's no way that you'd ever be able to find the perfect fit. But like in my experience being here for a somewhat long-ish time, like 8 out of 10 people, 9-ish out of 10 people end up on relatively standard equipment. If somebody knows that they want something like really specific, like Wes and I are going back and forth in the comments talking about like some pretty specific things right now. But like, you know, if you know that you want something specific and you have like an experience playing Shires before and you know that you want to mess with some different alloys and have, you know, a yellow brass slide with a gold crook with, you know, that's all cool. For most people, relatively standard equipment fits the bill. And it's relatively standard because after building trombones and trumpets and euphoniums, and we've been building brass instruments now for 25 years, we definitely see trends and we see what things go well together. So like looking at our standard models and our artist models, those are, you know, brought together by a unification of really popular components that work really well for that artist or that person, but also the vast majority of musicians. So just because she's saying, you know, we would probably suggest like something pretty standard, like a TW47. That's because like it's our most popular slide. And we feel really confident knowing that most people would respond really well. We wouldn't necessarily tell somebody who's never played Shires, why don't you order the TW4762 NLW long? Like, that's not going to do anything for you per se, unless there's a real reason that we would suggest that. So we'll try to steer you clear to what we feel like we would want ourselves to play or have the experience, or what we would want our colleague in the section or whatever to be playing on.
Yeah. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. You know, it's interesting going through this as well. A number of my students have all had appointments at Shires and play the horns and love them. Something that I've noticed with particularly students of recent that have bought, a lot of the equipment that is standard because it achieves a really wonderful sound. A lot of the smaller components, like the lead pipe or a counterweight or a mouthpiece, these can affect, at least my understanding is, these can affect the feedback that the player experiences. And these are much easier to change because they're at a lower price point. It seems like you guys have really thought this through so that when purchasing larger pieces, you can feel pretty confident it's going to last you a decade at least if if you don't need to make a change, because the fundamental core sound that it produces is in line with a very standard excellent sound that we try to achieve day to day in a myriad of different styles of playing.
Absolutely. And going, I guess, like kind of piggybacking off of both Sam and Alex, one of the jobs as a trombonist is to blend. Like, we play a beautiful blending instrument. So sometimes if you have something that's super custom, it might sound great by yourself in a practice room, but what about blending with, if you're playing second trombone, if you're playing first trombone and you're doing like a Brahms chorale or Mahler, what about that? One of the things to also take into account is, what style of music are you primarily playing? Are you principal trombonist? Are you doing chamber music? Are you mostly a soloist? Are you playing second trombone? Are you a student? Often students are pulled in so many different directions that they need a horn that's super versatile. So these are all things to consider as well. If you are primarily a second trombone player, your horn might be a little bit different than someone who is primarily playing maybe in a wind ensemble, to say, principal trombone in a wind ensemble. So these are all also things to take in consideration as well. Yeah.
We had a good question. Andrew Douglas wrote in, just since we're on the topic of slides, before we move on to bells. He says, so I'm currently playing on a TB47 Yellow Crook, so TB47YC for all you Shires geeks out there. And I'm looking for a little more clarity and stability in my sound. Would you recommend that I purchase a TW47 to facilitate that?
One of the first things that I would do, because if you go from a TB47YC to a TW47, you're changing two variables there. You're changing the alloy of the crook, but you're also changing the size of the crook. So one of the things I'd be curious first for you to try is, and I know it could be difficult to get your hands on all the different equipment, but a TB47, which has the yellow legs and the nickel crook, just to see if maybe you would rather have the yellow crook, or maybe that nickel crook is kind of what you're looking for, but you want something slightly different. You want to tweak it even a little bit more, and then you can try the TW47.
And the other thing to consider, and if we were going to be talking with you, whether it's email or phone or like a virtual fitting about this, is again, like, what are you trying to achieve? Like you mentioned, clarity and stability, but also what about like the size of the sound? How does that feel for you? Do you feel like it's broad and it's wide and you're falling into it a little bit, or are you looking for like more compactness? Because then that would give us more information to say, yeah, I mean, like maybe the tenor crook would be better, and maybe we'll keep the variables the same and keep you on a TW47 yellow crook so that it's a tenor crook still with the same alloy. So like that's why we love being able to talk with customers and geeking out about equipment, because we can typically help get you on the right path, even if it's not quite ready to pull the trigger on what you want to do, but at least help bring you to a point where you feel like you're more comfortable with what there is out there that we offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, he said I did play on the TB47 for about 6 months and it didn't make a huge difference. So there you go. So yeah, probably moving to a tenor crook would be a good idea. Our most popular one is the TW47 with that nickel crook. It's just a really nice balanced slide. Sometimes we talk about like Goldilocks instruments or components, and it's like one of those. Like, we build more TW47s than we build anything else. The yellow crook option is also a really lovely slide. It's just for so many people in so many settings. That TW47 with the nickel crook is
awesome. You can find the TW47 on something like our Colin Williams model. It's a fantastic slide. But yeah, so you want to try and isolate as many variables as possible. And it's kind of like a flow chart. Like, did this work? Did this not work? Well, you can kind of go from there. It's a fun process. It's a very fun process. And it can be overwhelming, which is why we're here to help guide you. We're here to help answer questions. We're here to meet virtually. So from there, obviously, you can't try it, which I'm so sorry about, because I'd be really curious, Alex. But from there, we would go to bell. And I think the bell is as I said, it's the soul of the instrument. There's so many intangibles in a bell, and each bell is so special. I get excited about bells. It's like that's where the voodoo comes in. I feel like sometimes with the bell. So you're coming from a Mount Vernon bell, which is the one-piece French bead wire unsoldered bell, correct, Alex? And what do you like about your one-piece bell? What do you like about your bell? Because I mean, obviously, Mount Vernon bell is an extraordinary bell. What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it?
The bell is obviously the reason that I play this horn. It's unbelievable. I've not really heard many bells that sound like it. Particularly, it begins to vibrate in the upper register when you play loud, and it has a shimmer that I rarely hear on other instruments. The downside is that it is a very heavy bell, and it takes a lot of immediacy of air to get the bell to respond. I find that it is a lot of work to play. And, this is a really interesting question that I think many trombonists run into. And it's a little pedagogical, but it's also an equipment question, so maybe you can speak to it. When you're trying a horn and you're trying to make a decision, it can be really daunting to balance the ease of playing with the desirable sound. When you have an instrument that makes a sound that you really love, but it's not super easy for you to play, versus when you have an instrument that is so easy, and maybe it's not quite the sound that you want immediately, but you can play it easier. That's an interesting dichotomy to think about, and I'd really be curious to hear what both of you think about that and how that informs this process.
What? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you want to go first, or should I?
Oh, I'll go first just because you're the trombonist and can speak a little bit more about that. But like from my perspective with like helping to fit musicians, it is so important on both ends of it. At the end of the day, you need to be on equipment that makes your job easier. It's a tool, and it's a means to creating music and art, and it has to be done in the best way to convey all of that. But you also have to love it. Like you have to wake up in the morning after when orchestras are back in session, or you're in a ensemble rehearsal until 10 p.m. and you have to get up at 6:30 so you can get your warm up in. Like you have to love your horn so much and the sound that you can create that you can wake up in the morning and be like, I don't really want to practice, but damn, I love my horn, or damn, it feels good, or I love the way that I sound on it. So to me, they really do both go hand in hand. I think in most cases, we're really able to help bridge the gap in finding through some of these tweaks. And it might not just be the valve or the bell or whatever. It might be the differences in the lead pipes that really kind of like seal the deal. I can't tell you how many appointments that I've done where the whole horn is great. Like they really, really like it. It's like, yeah, like if I had a choice, I'd probably go with this and I think I'll buy it. And then we try a nickel lead pipe of all things. And that's like, you just blew like the roof, like out of the building. Like they were like, oh my gosh, like this is now the horn. I can't even believe it. So sometimes like we can get it there pretty much. And then it's a couple little modifications. Maybe it's a counterweight. Maybe it's a lead pipe. Maybe it's going back and forth and thinking about the seam tuning slide versus the other one. It really just depends. But to me, like, I think we can typically straddle that line pretty well and help you in trying to achieve both. But yeah, they're both so important.
Yeah. I mean,
and Alexis, just so you know, it was just a little bit quiet on your end. So.
All right, I'll lean closer. And because at the end of the day, you're going to be the one with your horn for 8 hours, 10 hours, 2 hours, whatever. I'm not going to be there. Sam's not going to be there. It's about you and the horn. So it's extremely important that you find joy in playing the horn, that you're excited about playing the horn. And there are small tweaks that we can do, such as like a seam tuning slide versus a drawn tuning slide, which we'll get into later, versus maybe a sterling silver lead pipe or a brass lead pipe that really kind of take everything from here to here. I mean, that's a lock in place. It's hard to see. But we can really narrow it down, which is really fun process. And it's also really fun to be in the room when someone plays the first 3 notes and the whole room is just like, this is it. Like, this is it. No questions asked. because it does happen quite frequently, and it's a really special
Yeah.
moment.
I do want to say and be a little bit cocky here, not just about myself, but about like the work that we do to try to understand the instruments as best as we can. From hearing somebody play, even if it's on Zoom, like even listening to Alex, like already the gears in my head are turning like, okay, this is what I would put him on. And I think that we can get pretty close. And I don't know about Alexis, but I feel like fairly often, I won't say all the time, but fairly often, like my gut reaction about what equipment might work for somebody is actually pretty darn close to what it ends up being. So that's why I feel pretty good about these visual things, because we spend all of our time listening to musicians play and thinking about equipment. And even if it's on Zoom, I think we'll at least be able to give you some good feedback. I'm not saying that you should, if you're not ready, order the horn and, you know, whatever. But I do think that we'll be able to help give you some really good feedback just by hearing you play and then making suggestions. And I know that Alexis has incredible ears. And it's always really fun to see her work with customers, but even just hearing her talk to somebody on the phone about equipment and not even getting to hear them play, just like diagnosing and kind of getting into the nitty gritty. Like I feel very confident that we'll be able to help a lot of people through this process, even though we don't have the added luxury of you actually getting to try our beautiful instruments.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like coming to a candy factory. It's really fun. But in lieu of that, this is something that we could work through together to draw on the experiences of myself or Sam or even Matt, who was in the cast. Yeah. And try and get you the right horn or get you on the right path or demystify some of this. So with something like the bell, especially because you love your bell so much, I would want to keep you on something that does have that flexibility, that does have that roundness and that character that you get in your sound that's very different from what someone else gets, but that's what makes your playing special. So I would want to try and keep you on a one-piece bell, but I'd be really curious about a soldered bead wire to try and get that clarity, to get that efficiency. We could even try something like the vintage New York with the French bead. I'd be really curious, the soldered French bead, to see how you react to that. That's also only one variable difference, for the most part, between your bell. And it addresses directly the things that you wish you had a little bit more support from. So that's one of the big things I'd say. Or I'd even say the vintage New York bell, which is super standard because it is a fantastic bell. It has a lot of flexibility. It has a lot of character to it. The color, the color is really nice. The color, like,
Yeah.
I like the color of that one. The one-piece bells are very special. And one of the reasons why we do have that soldered bead wire is because it helps kind of make it a little bit more manageable. Which I think is something I'd be really curious to hear you on. So I would say something like the vintage New York would be great. If you wanted something that has a little bit more warmth to it, even our Chicago bell would be fantastic as well. It might be slightly less efficient, but you're going to still get that really warm color palette, that really golden sort of halo sound, but it's still going to have that soldered bead wire, which will keep that clarity as well, keep some of that clarity while still allowing you to have the sound color and the sound concept that you have in your head. So it will be for you to match them.
We had a good question from Dan Morris. Hey Dan, asking if there's recording equipment in the like showroom, and we do have a mic that we actually purchased. I mean, for what we're able to do, it allows us to be able to record you from like the back of the showroom and be able to send it to you. With Zoom stuff and like with all this time with us all being apart and not being able to play live in front of people, as like so many of us know, this is also a really good time to like record yourself and be able to listen back critically and think about like what Alex is saying, like what are some of the things in my playing that I want to work on? What of that is me? What of that might be able to be achieved with some equipment changes? When you're in the showroom, you have us in real time responding to what you're playing and how you feel. But yeah, Dan, you're totally right. Like it's nice to be able to listen back to yourself. We definitely have a lot of musicians who either bring their own equipment. Like, do you remember when we had a couple friends from New York, Alexis, who came in and set up all of the recording equipment all around the showroom? And it was like, a movie production. It was amazing. Our setup isn't as sophisticated as that, but we do have something so that we can like email you the file or you can listen back. That part of it is a helpful tool for sure. But it's another nice luxury that you have this time on your end to be able to record yourself and listen to, even before we would do this kind of fitting. So like you can hear how you sound, and then maybe that mirrors what we have to say. Like, this is what we hear in your sound, XYZ.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, recording equipment's good. Sorry. So, getting back to bells, one of the other interesting bells could be actually even going to a modified two-piece. This would be kind of I want to keep you on the vintage New York, but just so we could spitball, because part of this is just kind of bouncing ideas back and forth. The Alessi bell is a fantastic bell because it is a modified two-piece, which means that you also have the flexibility of the one-piece, but you have stability of a two-piece as well. But because the bead wire is unsoldered, you're still going to have a lot of warmth and a lot of resonance to the bell. So if given 3 bells, I would probably say vintage New York, Chicago, or an Alessi bell. They're all fantastic options that will help keep that resonance and hopefully give you a little bit more stability. And they're all very standard. They're all extremely standard. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the event that I had a question related to this kind of thing, you have a lot of this equipment in the showroom and could play and send it to me, and I could play and send to you back.
Yeah, or in real time, like in these virtual appointments. I'm not sure if she'll do it right now.
No, I'm asking in terms of the availability for
great question.
Exchange of videos is possible with this as well.
Totally.
That's very cool.
Sorry.
No, he's saying like if you're having like an ongoing conversation about equipment, like if I'm able to go to like a dealer and try something, or can you like test something in the showroom and like I can hear you playing on it. Like I think one of the nice things about having, especially Alexis, because I don't think she said this, but she's an incredible trombone player, and hails from MSM and Juilliard and Boston University and trombone of the Southwest Florida Symphony and Freeland, all these wonderful things. She's amazing. It's all great. But she's an incredible player, and to be able to hear her playing on some of this equipment can kind of illustrate the differences between the alloys or between the Alessi bell versus the vintage New York bell. Some of that stuff is still subtle and it's going to be tough, and some of it's also feel, so she can only talk to how it feels to her. In some virtual appointments, I'm sure she'll play. In some trumpet appointments, I'm sure we can have one of our, very talented, incredible trumpet players play something for you if you really need to hear the differences. Tonight we were screwing around a little bit, but the showroom is so live and so boomy that it was kind of like redlining a little bit, so the audio is getting a little bit messed up. In the future with some of our virtual appointments, we'll make sure that we're using the mic so we can like control all of that. But that is totally an option. One of the reasons that the virtual appointments will be done from the showroom, so that Alexis can actually use the equipment that's in there and answer your questions.
Plus, it's super fun to play around.
Yeah.
I would love that. So please make these like bills. That's great. So from there, after you do bell, slide, bell, from there I like to go to tuning slide. Tuning slide, I feel like is a lot about feel, honestly, to whomever is trying it out. But there are different things that we can do. So if you are playing a horn, you love this horn at this point, but maybe it's a little splashy, or maybe you wish you had a little bit more depth of sound, we can always try a gold tuning slide, which is a nice pairing with a yellow bell. It gives a little bit more depth. Or maybe you're on a gold bell and we can always do a yellow tuning slide. We can really mix and match from there. We also have a couple different options with drawn versus seamed, and those feel very different, frankly. Generally, a drawn tuning slide is just drawn as a tube. And then you have a seam tuning slide, which is a piece of brass that we basically seam over. We braze it together, but because you have that overlap, you're getting a little bit more weight, which gives you a little bit more stability. And again, that's about a feel thing.
And it's really interesting too with like the seam versus drawn tuning slides. Like to me, also because I'm a trumpet player, I have to go based on what I hear and what the musician is saying, how it feels. It really seems like it's 50-50. Like half the people are like, oh, the seamed tuning slide feels like it's so direct and compact and nice, and like I can sit in the sound and everything lines up and it's just like boom. And for other people, they're like, oh, it feels so stuffy, like it feels like I can't like play. So it's really interesting. We can usually have a pretty good guess on what it will feel like for a person just based on the way that they sound, their equipment, the way that they play. But it is really interesting that it's like people tend to like love it, or they're like, it's not for me. Like pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so tuning slide is definitely, that's why I like to have it as sort of one of the last things, because I feel like that's a little bit like a lead pipe, and that you're starting to narrow down the details. You're starting to really narrow in the nuance and the last like sprinkles. The last sprinkles. I've been baking a lot during quarantine. Um, so you start getting really all of the exciting kind of, I don't want to say decorative, but we start narrowing it down from figuring out valve, slide, bell. Similar to narrowing something down, then we'll go to lead pipe. And we offer 3 different sizes of lead pipe primarily. We offer different, we have sterling silver, brass, nickel. These all feel and react slightly differently. So if someone, they're like, I love this horn, but I still wish there was a little bit more clarity, maybe sterling silver is the right way to go. Or they want a little bit more warmth, or they feel like they want a little bit more room as they play. Maybe they want a slightly larger lead pipe. So Alex, for you, what or lead pipe are you on?
So my horn has it's just a standard 2-sized yellow brass lead pipe.
That's a great lead pipe too. It's fantastic lead pipe. So if you felt comfortable on that, I would keep it. I would keep it. If you felt like, oh, I wish I had a little bit more support, maybe we go to a 1.5. Maybe we would go to a 2 long, just to see how that would feel for you. Because generally our long lead pipes, they have about an extra inch at the end, which helps stabilize playing. Our sterling silver lead pipes are automatically that extra long. Um, but that's an option as well to further kind of create clarity in your trombone playing. So, yeah. A lot.
That's a lot. So one just quick aside. Obviously, we've covered a whole fitting for trombone. Partially because we obviously make a lot of trombones, and also because we invited Alex to do the session with us tonight. We are, of course, offering these virtual appointments for trumpet and for euphonium. I don't know that Alexis is going to want to play the trumpet for you per se. It's not all. I'm sure she'll be great.
If you have enemies, I'll play.
But we can still. I mean, she can talk trumpet shop really, really well. Like knows all of our models. If it's something where there's like more specific questions, you've always got myself and Matt, who are both trumpet players. If it's something that you want to hear something, we can definitely like work on something like that too. For euphonium, we have 2 models, and so a virtual fitting is nice because even if Alexis isn't necessarily going to play the euphonium for you, we can talk through some of those different changes between the 2 models and kind of help you decide based on what you've been playing and the type of playing that you do, what that is. So these virtual appointments are going to be wonderful, not just for trombone, but also for trumpet and also for euphonium. I think that it's a really nice way to be able to get to know you and your playing and offer you as much support as we can from our side of the factory.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing with these appointments is we want to make sure that we are there to help you find the perfect horn for you. And it might not be solved in an hour. It might be a little bit of back and forth just because the circumstances are they're new. But the goal is to get you on the right path, to have you feel comfortable, to have you feel like you do have the support of our team, which is, I think it's pretty great.
It's a great team. And the other thing too is that for a lot of people, this virtual appointment might go hand in hand with you getting to visit a dealer, getting to, if the world returns to normal, meet up with us at ATW or the International Trumpet Guild or the Tuba Euphonium show down in DC. Like you might do something like this so you can narrow down the specs of what you think you're going to want, and then be able to go to Quinlan Fabish in Chicago and test something out, or go to Josh Whitehouse at Milano Music in Mesa, Arizona, and go test out all these TW47s and fun lead parts that we're talking about in the sidebar comments. So this might be another additional step that's really nice. I am just going to link our dealer page so that we added a nice new little nifty dealer locator, so you could pop in your zip code and it shows you who the dealers are in that area. But you don't necessarily need to think of this as a one-stop like shop for just this. This should be a resource for you. So if you have equipment questions, you can always email, you can always pick up the phone and call us. This should be if you have, really pertinent questions that you'd rather just be able to get a better grasp of what's going on. So.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off that really quick as well. In quarantine, in a time like this where so many of us are so isolated in individual rooms, for many students that are in undergraduate and are used to being in a studio with a lot of people, or high school players that are used to being in band every day with friends, trumpet, trombone, euphonium, tuba, it doesn't matter. It's important to remember that we have to band together as a brass community somewhat digitally, in addition to just in the spirit of understanding that what we do is difficult, and if we're all going to continue to improve, we have to foster a culture of support. And I think that what happens at Shires right now with these virtual fittings is really a great step in that direction. It's why I was so excited to be a part of this. I know that you guys have been shut down for some time and you're recently opened back up. It's a really important step that you're making yourselves available to do this for everybody, because there are lots of people that may not be ready to buy a new horn right now, but they're starting to think about it, and to get some advice on what they might feel like would be the right move for them down the road, that can help inform how they're practicing. That, for all of you that are thinking about, maybe you've hit a roadblock in your playing, maybe you're really frustrated with your high range, maybe your sound is just bright and you don't like it. This is a great time where you can make an appointment, and you can talk to Alexis and you can ask questions, and she can play some stuff for you, she can listen to you play, and maybe you do want to make an equipment switch, but this is the best way to find that out, truly.
Yeah, obviously we don't charge anything for this or whatever. It's always just because we want to try to help you find the best equipment. And at the end of the day, if you don't buy Shires trombone or trumpet or euphonium, but you learn more about it, then we're still happy about that. I mean, for us, it's like, I love talking about equipment. I never knew how much I liked talking about equipment because I never cared about it when I was like playing a trumpet. I just play the same trumpet and the same mouthpiece all the time. Alexis has been on her horn for years and has never changed anything. Like, we're probably like the two worst ones, because we find something that we like and we're happy with it and we're content. But the process of being able to get somebody to that point that like we feel content with our own equipment, that's what's so fun for us. Like, I think we're both motivated in that same way, that like, we want you to have a total blast playing, and if it's on a Shires, that's great, and if it is, like, we'd love to help you get there. So I don't know, that's my philosophy.
I totally agree. There's so many fantastic horns out there. If it's a Shires, awesome. If it's not, are you happy? If you're happy, even more awesome.
That's what matters.
Pretty simple.
Yeah. Alex, did you have anything else on your docket? Like, I would love, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about some of the projects that you're doing, and some of like the fun stuff that we've been seeing on social media from your pages too, because you've, of course, and we appreciate it, highlighted some of our wonderful artists, and of course Alexis too, and it's really fun to be able to get a little glimpse into some positivity right now.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, over the last year, I was really busy. I was playing in an orchestra in Florida. I was playing in an orchestra in Maine. I was flying back and forth. It was wonderful. I had a bunch of masterclass tours at different colleges planned, and then it all ended. Right. And like many of us, I had 3 or 4 weeks where I was really down, and I was questioning, whether what I did was important and why I did this. And then I had this really jarring thought, and that was that if this continued into the fall, there would be a lot of fourth graders that would be learning trombone for the first time over Zoom with band directors that may not play trombone. And that was a terrifying thought for me. I spent years as a public school educator as well, and I'm very committed to education. And the trombone is such a special instrument because it's very different than a lot of other band instruments. And I realized that if we had a year of digital instruction with no support for young trombonists, we could have huge problems for the trombone community 10 years down the line. And so I launched a website called Tromboneguide.com, and it's basically a free pedagogy site. All of the PDFs and warm-ups are things that I've developed. They're all part of my pedagogy and my teaching methodology. And it was not designed to be about me. It was designed to be about the community. I reached out to a lot of other trombonists that I know and asked them to write articles, and we just decided we were going to make this free for everybody to use. And the response has been unbelievable. I get messages from people all over the place. Some of my trombone heroes have written me very, very warm messages. And it's just such a reflection of the joy of the community. And, I'm having a lot of fun running it. I'm having a lot of fun putting up videos and free information. I'm looking into starting a Patreon for it so that people can fund it. And with that funding, I'm going to, rather than take money for myself, I'm going to use that money to grow, bring in some guest artists to have conversations. We're going to talk about, I'm going to ask questions that haven't been asked about, when big professional players have struggled in their careers and how they got through that. Things that may be different than what is talked about in the community right now, so that we as a community can grow and really support each other through what is a really difficult time. So that's kind of been what's been on my docket. Alexis mentioned I did write a book last year. It's called 30 Routines for the Modern Trombonist. It is for sale on my website. The publisher is still closed down due to COVID, so I'm actually looking for another publisher. So if you are a publisher and you'd like to publish my book, you can definitely contact me. But other than that,
I did link your website, and I also linked
kind of you.
Tromboneguide.com too. So if anybody is reading through the comments, you can find that stuff there.
Yeah. And other than that, I've got a pretty robust group of students that I'm teaching online right now, and I'm planning some master classes and virtual and in person in the future. So we're all just doing the best we can through this, and I think that the community support of events like this, that anybody can take part in a virtual fitting, I think is so important. But also, so many trombonists. I've got to plug Brian Hecht and Nathan Zagonk. They have this absolutely wonderful slide school that's available. Toby Oft has a really great program that is also a digital subscription program where you're getting these master classes online. I'm sure there are other people. Those are the two I've noticed. It is a great time to be a trombone student or a trombone enthusiast, regardless of how difficult things are right now, because there is so much information available and people are available with their time. If you ever wanted to take a lesson with so-and-so in so-and-so such symphony, but you can't fly to wherever they are, now's a great time to send an email and ask these questions. People are really excited to talk to other musicians that are still excited. And I keep just being infected with the joy of that, because that's why I play the trombone, because the music inspires people to live better lives. And
Such an uplifting message.
it's a little sappy, but it really does help in times like this.
Totally true, dude. Well, Alexis, I'm going to throw it over to you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about this virtual fitting process, or anything else at Shires or Grass World? Or
I think the biggest thing is that we are here to be a resource. It doesn't particularly matter if like where you're from at this point, which is kind of fantastic. We can actually take this as a silver lining, just to say, this is a new service. And if you're in Japan, if you're in Germany, if you're in California, and maybe your schedules are super crazy, maybe now there's that whole quarantine to get into Massachusetts.
Yep.
So able to offer this as a resource. It's another way to get information. Any questions you have, we're here. Obviously, it's kind of a bummer that you can't try out horns here at the factory, but this is also just I really can't stress enough how this is a great resource.
Yeah, and just because you can't try horns here at the factory doesn't mean that some of our really incredible dealers don't have instruments available and in stock. So if you do know what you want, like a lot of our dealers like Josh over at Milano Music just added a whole list of everything that they have in stock. I mean, they're still getting monthly shipments of Shires instruments because people are still, and we're so grateful. We're so grateful that people are still interested in buying new instruments. But you know, there's still a really wonderful opportunity out there. And in some states, in some stores, and each one is a little bit different, so we definitely suggest calling them and asking. You can test instruments in a safe way. The reason that we haven't opened that up quite yet for Shires is Massachusetts is a little bit strict. We're also primarily the manufacturer, so we need to make sure that everybody stays so safe so that we don't go down and then can't continue to produce instruments. We do have plans to be able to open up the showroom again. You know, as soon as we're able, we have protocols that are in place. We have a system and a plan to be able to do that in a safe way. We do need to wait a little bit longer to see how things are tracking in Massachusetts and the surrounding areas. But regardless, even when we do open up back full stop, the virtual fitting, like Alexis is saying, is still a resource. And I think it's something that's going to actually stick around from now on. You'll be able to decide if you want to do a virtual fitting or an in-person fitting or both, or send us an email or message us on Facebook. Or, I mean, you know, we're here. We're totally here. And we love what we do and we love getting to connect with you guys. I think the saddest thing for me right now is not being able to get to see everyone at some of our conferences and our upcoming events and all of that, because it's really nice to be able to correspond with somebody and then get to meet them afterwards, or get to like start that process by meeting them and then like figure out what's going to be working for them and hearing from them later on. So that part of it is sad, but we're still here and we're doing wonderful things with building instruments and innovating and designing things. And I mean, we're so blessed and so happy to be doing what we're doing and keeping everyone safe and doing it in the most responsible and safe way too. But virtual fittings, I'm pumped about it. I know Alexis is super thrilled, and we already started doing some bookings. So if you're interested in it, you can go onto the website. I just linked it, seshires.com/schedule. If you have just general equipment questions, you're not sure you really want to go with a virtual appointment yet, email us at info@seshires.com. You can also send us an email from the website that comes directly to us. So, but I don't have anything else. What about you guys? Do you have anything else you want to add? No? Okay. Well, thanks to you, Alex, for being such a really very brilliant and intelligent guinea pig for today's session.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Talented, handsome, all the stuff. Yeah.
Oh, stop it.
Nice job. And Alexis, thanks for sticking around at the shop all night to be there for this 8 p.m. session.
I got to practice in the showroom, so it's totally.
It's nice. It's better than practicing in apartments and things. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm excited to say that we have another few ShiresTV episodes that are on the docket. We're going to do an orchestral trombone panel with some of our amazing artists that we haven't heard from yet, and we've been kind of like waiting, and we're very excited about this. So stay tuned for that announcement on Monday. And we're also going to do a military band panel, and we'll talk about some of the careers in the military and auditions for that stuff. It's really fun to be able to cover such a wide group of topics within our musical and brass community. And the military bands and the musicians that are in them are some of the most incredible people and roles and jobs. So I think that is going to be a really nice one too. And then we'll have to figure out like a final thing to like seal the deal. We will keep doing some ShiresTV as it becomes available. We're going to continue doing masterclasses with some of our artists. So stay tuned for that as well. And then we're going to be partnering with some of our dealers throughout the year as well to offer some artist specific masterclasses with them virtually. So we're going to keep content coming out. And if you have any other questions, you can always reach out to us, info@seshires.com. Head over to the website and you can get in touch with us there. But for now, I think we're going to say goodnight, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. And thanks to you two for doing such a wonderful job and being a part of this process. So appreciate it. Awesome. Thanks everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye. See ya.